Okay, I think we'll make a start. So thanks for attending our webinar. So we're holding this as part of our engagement on City Plan 2041 Key Issues stage. This webinar is specifically looking at the topics of the housing and the spatial strategy. My name's Helen Pennington. I work in the planning policy team at the council, and I'll be running through our first few introductory slides, and then I'll hand over to Steve Tremlett, who's going to cover the rest of the presentation. So just run through a bit of housekeeping. So we're going to record this webinar, and a recording will be posted on the council's YouTube channel, and we'll post a link to that in the chat shortly. We'll make sure that any personal information is redacted before the recording is uploaded. Microphones and cameras will remain off during the webinar. Please use the Q&A function to ask any questions rather than the chat. You can also like each other's questions if you want to. Please add the questions as we're going along, and then we'll answer the questions at the end of the presentation. If we can't answer any questions today, we'll try and address common themes. If you have any technical questions or queries, for instance, if you can't hear properly, please post that in the Q&A as well, and we'll answer those as we're going along. Do please remember that we'll need you to formally respond to the consultation through the council's consultation portal, Your Voice. And we'll add a link to that in the chat as well shortly. And also, just finally, please be mindful of what you put in the Q&A. We'll have to remove anything abusive. So just to go over what the city plan is before we start. So it's a statutory document that we're required to produce. The legal process in terms of its preparation, and it must meet the test of soundness. So this means that we have to plan positively to meet our needs of the city. All policies have to be justified, so they have to be evidence-based. They also need to be effective, so we need to be able to deliver the policies, and they also need to be consistent with national policy, which is the National Planning Policy Framework. So the city plan sets a framework of planning policies to guide future development. It also helps to deliver the council plan and supports various other citywide strategies, such as the housing strategy, local transport plan, the economic strategy, our policies around zero carbon, accessible city, health and wellbeing, and so on. So the city plan identifies all the housing and commercial space requirements that we're required to provide in the city. It also supports high quality and well-designed places. It encourages the conservation and enhancement of the city's environment, our biodiversity and important heritage assets. Also ensures new development is sustainable, that the necessary infrastructure required to support new developments provided, and it covers the whole of the city apart from the parts that fall within the South Downs National Park. They have their own local plan. So currently the city plan for the city is made up of two parts. So we have City Plan Part 1, that was adopted in 2016, and City Plan Part 2, which was adopted in 2022. So City Plan Part 1 sets the strategic policies for the city, includes some strategic site allocations, and it's this part which is the focus of the review. We need to ensure that it reflects any changed circumstances that have happened since 2016, as well as the new council plan. City Plan Part 2, that contains more of our detailed development management policies, as well as some additional site allocations. This is up to date and so isn't part of the review unless there are changes around national policy or local priorities that need to be updated and reflected. So together, once we've finished the review, we'll have a new city plan that amalgamates the revised policies in Part 1 as well as the current policies in Part 2, and that will be known as our new City Plan 2041. So this consultation is the very first stage in producing City Plan 2041. It sets out the key issues that we think the new city plan needs to address, as well as some options for addressing them. But we want to know whether there are any other issues we need to consider, and there'll be further public consultation after this stage. So as you can see from the timeline, we're at our first stage of consultation. We're hoping to come back for our second stage on the draft plan around this time next year. And following that, there'll then be further consultation on our proposed submission before we submit to government. So I'll just quickly run through the 9 themes that are in the key issues document. So we have a theme on spatial strategy, so where development's going to be located, sustainability and climate change, homes for everyone, design and placemaking, culture and tourism, healthy city and communities, transport and infrastructure, thriving diverse economy, and biodiversity and green infrastructure. I'm now going to hand over to Steve, who will go through the rest of our presentation for you.
Thank you, Helen. So as noted at the start, this webinar is going to focus on 2 of the themes that Helen has just been through, and those are homes for everyone, so our approach to housing, and spatial strategy, which is where the overall approach to where development should go in the city over the plan period. And those 2 obviously are very closely linked, because housing is most significant forms of development we will be planning for over the period. So, just like with housing, what is our current approach to the supply of housing? So when this is currently set out in City Plan Part 1, that was adopted in 2016. In 2015, we assessed the need for housing over the plan period for the current plan. So that was 2010 to 2030. And the need for new housing was assessed to be 30,120. That's approximately 1,500 dwellings per year. As part of the evidence base for that plan, we had to examine to what extent we could meet that need, and then come up with a housing target which goes into the plan. And the housing target, which is contained in the adopted plan, is 13,200. That's only 44% of the need that was assessed at that time. That's because of the limited capacity in the city to accommodate new housing. We are very tightly constrained by the sea on one side, the national park around to the north and the east, and to the west. Our boundary is part of a continuous built-up area to Ada. So we are very much reliant on brownfield sites. It's a limited supply of those, and there's very limited opportunities for the city to expand outwards. So this is just to give a factual flavour of exactly what has actually been delivered in the city since over the plan period for the current plan, so from 2010 to 11. So we've seen there that most recent year, 23-24, so that takes us up to the end of March 24, there were 1,075 new homes delivered in the city, and the last 3 years have been the most productive in terms of delivering new homes. Before that, it's much lower. If you bear in mind that our city plan target is 660 per year, most of those years have been below that. More recently, we've done better, but overall, the average over the plan period is 562 so far. And you can kind of see the impact of adopting the City Plan Part 1 in 2016, as the average numbers in more recent years are partly reflected by some of the larger site allocations in that plan, which are now coming forward and being delivered. So looking forward to our new plan to consider what our future housing need is. The need now is set by the government. It's a formula called the standard method, which gives a figure for all local authorities across the country. Gives them a figure for the number of houses that they need to try and plan for. The current standard method for us, this is set out in the National Planning Policy Framework, gives us a figure of 2,333 dwellings per annum. There are proposed planning reforms that will alter the standard method. That makes a slight difference for us when those come into force. That'll put it up to approximately 2,400 dwellings per annum. But if we remember that our target in our current plan is 660, and that was based on looking at the evidence for how much housing it was considered possible to deliver at that time. That shows the scale of the challenge that we have in the city of trying to meet our housing needs. We're currently aware of enough sites to provide approximately 11,500 homes over the period to 2041. That works out at about 670 homes per annum. And one of the big challenges we've got with this new city plan is looking at all sources of housing supply and seeing how far we can get towards our housing need figure of 2,400. It's highly unlikely that we will be able to meet that, but we will need to show that we have looked at all possible ways of raising housing supply to try and get close to that figure. So our current city plan approach, this is touching on the spatial strategy. So where should development go? So nearly all of our development is on brownfield sites. We've got very limited sites in the way of greenfields. Over 90% of planned developments on brownfield sites. We have 8 what we call development areas, which are set out in City Plan Part 1. I'll touch on what they are on the next slide. City Plan Part 1 also includes some large site allocations, which are mainly in these development areas. And we have some further sites, brownfield sites allocated in City Plan Part 2, as well as some sites on the urban fringe. The urban fringe being the sort of greenfield area between the edge of the current urban area and the South Downs National Park. So these development areas, I mentioned we've got 8 of them in City Plan Part 1. They are parts of the city that have got or did have significant potential for new developments. There may be some large major regeneration sites in there, and they're mostly located along the main public transport routes. They're quite sustainable. It reduces people to own cars. One exception to that is Total Valley, which is one large greenfield site we allocated on the edge of the city between King George VI Avenue and the A27. I'll show you a map in a moment, just showing where the rest of the development areas are. This is an example of one of them. This is Hove Station. You may be familiar with this. That's an example of the sort of large-scale development that we are seeing coming forward now, which is helping to boost our housing numbers, as shown in the graph I showed previously. That is one of the development areas. There's also some significant development on the south side of the railway, which you can't be seen in that image. The urban fringe, as mentioned, that's the area between the existing urban area and the South Downs National Park. Just to be clear, it's not green belt. So when we hear in the press about the current government changing the approach to green belt, that what's been talked about there doesn't apply to the urban fringe. It is not a formally designated green belt, although it is a green field. There are some environmental designations on there, local nature reserves, sites of nature conservation interest, and so on. It's also very important for open space and recreation, biodiversity in it, and particularly for linking the existing built-up area into the national park. So we have there is some development coming forward on allocated sites. The image you can see there is just off Coldine Lane, which is one of our sites. There's a development there called Bluebell Heights, which is now being completed. So this image just shows you our current approach. So the green area is the South Downs National Park. The grey area is the existing built-up area, and it's clear from this just how tightly the national park is drawn around the urban area and how limited we are in the amount of space that we have to expand the city. The light blue areas is the urban fringe. They're not the all allocated sites. That is the totality of the urban fringe is shown there in light blue. The bigger areas to the east, some of that is Brighton Racecourse and Sheepcote Valley, and the other bits are sort of to the north, but it's much sort of thinner areas, and there's a finger on the west, which is Benfield Valley, which is the bit which extends into the urban area. The purple areas are development areas, so those are Shoreham Harbour, which extends into Ada. We've got sort of joint planning department, joint planning document of Ada looking at that area. Total Valley, Hove Station, the city centre. There is the Brighton Centre and Churchill Square, Brighton Marina, the gasworks site, Edward Street and Eastern Road, where we've seen the new hospital development, Amex House, so on. London Road development area in New England Quarter, and then a long finger stretching up the Lewis Road to Sussex University, where there's also been significant development, particularly at Preston Barracks. That's our current approach to the spatial strategy. One of the things we'll be doing as part of the new plan is considering if this approach of setting out development areas is still appropriate, given that many of the large sites in them have currently been built out, like a Hove station, like a Preston Barracks and so on. We'll also be considering if there are any other parts of the city that could be suitable for large-scale development. So overall, how can we look to improve our ability to meet our housing needs? How can we boost development in general? So these are some of the steps which we could consider. We are holding a call for sites. So as part of this consultation at the moment, we are asking landowners, developers, planning agents, and so on, do they know of any sites which might be available for development over the plan period, which we were not currently aware of. We could consider building upwards. We have seen some taller buildings come forward in the city in recent years. Some of those I've just shown you at Hove Station. We could look for more sites for tall buildings, or perhaps very tall buildings. Tall, the way we define that, is just over 6 stories. Some people might say that's not particularly tall. Very tall ones could be over 10 or 12. We could specifically identify sites for them. We're also looking to expand our own house building programme of council houses. We're looking for sites for those. We could look to optimise the density of new developments. That's looking at the sites that we're aware of and considering how much development we can get on there and how it can be designed to make the most of those sites so we get as much use out of them as possible. We're also considering suburban densification. So that's looking at some of our lower density areas, existing residential areas that may have opportunities to redevelop some sites, or perhaps some infill development where we can boost the amount of housing within the existing built up area there. We will also be required to ask our neighbouring councils if they can help. That can be a difficult process. Many of our neighbouring councils are similarly constrained to us, particularly those on the coast. They also have the sea and the national park, and they have difficulty in meeting their own housing needs, but we are required to ask them, and also ask those to the north of the Downs, Horsham, mid Sussex, and so on, who may have more capacity. Another thing we are looking at is whether we can manage the number of second homes in the city. There's a considerable amount of those being used for Airbnb and so on. Our powers to do so through the planning system are limited at the moment. We also have special areas in the existing city plan. What these are sort of individual policies related to specific areas where there are many different issues and competing demands for land. They help to coordinate development in these areas and help placemaking. So examples of these are the seafront. It's got a demand for land there. It's got a important environmental, cultural and leisure role in the city. So we have a policy which helps to coordinate development that we've seen on the seafront and are continuing to see, particularly on the eastern side of the Palace Pier. 20% for Brighton, reflecting the competing demands there for business, shopping, leisure, some residential as well in the centre of the city, and how we manage those mix of uses. One for the urban fringe, which I've already mentioned. Valley Gardens, that was intended to support the improvements that we've seen down Valley Gardens. Phase 1 and 2 are now completed. Phase 3 will be starting soon. There's another one looking at our local communities and trying to ensure that they have good access to jobs, services within walking distance of home. So as part of the new plan, we'll be reviewing these and considering which areas we think might need their own policy in the plan. Just now getting a little bit more into the detail of housing, so housing policies that we'll be bringing forward. It's important that the housing which comes forward meets the needs of the city and the changing needs of the city as well over the plan period of 2041. So we've commissioned some evidence looking at what size of houses that development should provide, where is the greatest need, what is it, 1, 2, 3 bedrooms or so on. And the table which you can see on the slide there shows the outcome of that work. So we think development should normally provide a mix of housing sizes as well, rather than all 1 bedroom or all 2 bedroom. And we're also considering whether we should set a minimum percentage of family homes on some sites. I mentioned before that a lot of our sites are brownfield, which are more suited to flatter developments. It's often difficult to provide family homes on those sites because families generally prefer not to live in flats, or 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom flats are less popular. So where we do have sites that are suitable for more traditional homes, should we be setting minimum percentages for family homes on those to help meet that? Affordable housing. This is a big issue in Brighton and Hove. Be aware that house prices, house and rents in Brighton are very high. Our evidence shows that to buy a typical house in Brighton, the income required is nearly £60,000 per year, and just to rent, people are rent an individual flat by yourself. People generally need £37,000 worth of income in order to afford to rent. The affordability ratio, so looking at the between house prices and earnings, is nearly 13. Normally, historically, mortgage lenders generally lend on a ratio of about 4 to 5. So that shows how unaffordable houses are to many people in the city. The greatest need for affordable housing is to rent. That's both social rent through the council's own stock and housing associations, and what's known as affordable rent, which is we've definitely set out national policy, but it's a set discount off the typical market rent. There is demand for affordable home ownership, which often takes the form of shared ownership, but often the prices, the cost of doing that is still unaffordable for many households in the city. One thing we tend to do is look at whether we should prioritise affordable housing for rent when it comes forward for new developments, because that's where the greatest need for affordable overall. So yes, this is confirmed what I said. With affordable housing, we think we should prioritise affordable homes for rent. We intend to continue to seek affordable housing contributions in smaller sites with less than 10 homes. In national policy, it's only required that affordable housing forms part of a development of 10 or more. In our current plan, because of the demand for affordable housing in the city, and because we see a lot of smaller sites in our city, we don't have any big development sites, our policy is to seek affordable housing contributions on sites of 5 or more. So we would be looking to continue that approach. We're also considering whether we should seek affordable homes as part of extra care and assisted living developments. We don't currently do so, but we have an ageing population in the city, and there is likely to be a demand for more affordable elements of those types of developments. But the one thing we need to consider when we are setting a requirement for affordable housing is that it must be viable and must balance the viability of providing affordable housing and all the other things that we require in our policies. In essence, this is that providing affordable housing is a cost to a developer. It eats away at their bottom line, it eats away at the amount of profit they make, as do providing sustainability measures, as does proven design developments, making it high quality, and which we also seek. Providing biodiversity measures is also a cost. If we want to seek, for example, underground car parking or use a greater area of a site for parking, that reduces the amount of development that can be put on there. That also affects the viability. So we need to ensure that everything that we are asking through our various policies in the city plan does not mean that development becomes unviable. We'll be doing some evidence-based work next year that looks at that as we finalise our policies. Okay, moving on to homes for rent. So the private rented sector, that accounts for a third of housing in the city, which is much more larger than the typical national average, and it's grown by another 10% over the past decade. This again is likely to be because of the cost of housing in the city to buy, and the fact we have quite a large number of younger people in the city who may find it more difficult to buy as well. It's resulted in strong developer interest for build-to-rent developments and co-living. So build-to-rent is where there'd be a large block of flats built, and none of them would be sold. They'd be owned by a single developer or operator, and they would all be rented out. Co-living is similar, but the units are not self-contained. there are people would share cooking facilities, share some social space, and so on. These sorts of developments are generally good quality and well managed, but they're expensive, particularly compared to existing flats, which may be sort of converted flats, existing buildings, or shared housing. They're not often meeting a need for those who are struggling to get on the housing ladder, but there is a demand for them. What we're looking to do is ensure they provide a mix of housing units rather than the very large developments, for example, all of one-bedroom flats. And we're looking to see how we can require them to provide affordable housing as well. But that's a slightly more difficult process when it's all for these types of development. We do have a current policy specifically for build to rent that requires up to 20% discounted rent for 20% of the units, that is, for affordable housing. And we'll be looking to see how we can extend that policy or do a new policy to cover co-living to try and get some affordable housing through that as well. But again, we'll need to be looking at the viability of doing so. We've just got a few more slides left. It's 3 left. So student accommodation. I thought I would touch on this as it's quite a it's always quite a high profile issue in the city. So this is just some statistics about the student housing market, just to help people get an understanding of its size. So we've got 2 universities in the city, Sussex and Brighton. In total, in 21-22, there were nearly 31,000 full-time students studying at both of those universities. Our evidence shows that just under a third don't need term time accommodation. They may be living at home, commuting from outside the city, living with relatives, living in their own home, so on. And that number's actually rising, and that might be because of the accommodation costs and cost of studying in general. That means that the need, so the number of students, full-time students that require somewhere specific to live to attend the 2 universities in the city is just under 22,000. In the city, we have approximately 10,000 purpose-built student accommodation bed spaces. So that means there is about 12,000 students that will be living elsewhere, probably in the private rented sector in the city, in HMOs or in smaller flats and so on. Looking forward to how that is going to change over the planned period. The University of Brighton is moving 2,000 students from their Eastbourne campus to Brighton and Hove, and the University of Sussex is seeking to grow by another 2,000 students. That's 4,000 extra full-time students. If we assume that 29% don't need accommodation, that means there'll be about 2,800 that do need somewhere to live. The graph on the right shows the supply of new purpose-built student bed spaces that's come forward over the plan period. So we can see that in recent years there's been a big jump, a significantly increased level of provision. So in 1920 there were 1,700 new bed spaces provided and 1,500 nearly in 2021-22. This in itself, it doesn't bring new students into the city. If these bedrooms have not been developed, those students would need to live somewhere else. So it's good that the supply is increased. It reduces the pressure on the private rented sector. The pipeline, so those developments for student accommodation that we know are in development, under construction, or have planning permission, is about 3,300. So this is more than the extra need of 2,800, which we're aware of. This means that the number of students that live in accommodation in the general sector, in the general private rented sector, should decrease. So that. We also address in the city plan housing for other groups, so older people, those with disabilities. Census data and demographic analysis shows the number of people over 65 is expected to rise significantly over the next 20 years. So we may need to support through our policies more specialised housing and more affordable options as well for people that need housing like that as the population ages. National policy also requires us to provide plots of land for people that want to build their own homes. It's called self-build housing. We've found this difficult in the past, again, because of the lack of greenfield sites in the city, but we'll be looking to what extent we can meet the needs of those on the register of self-build. And we also need to require sorry, we also need to consider the need for additional gypsy and traveller pitches. We are commissioning evidence at the moment to look at what the demand is for additional pitches for that element of the community, in addition to those which are currently provided at the Horsestein site. That is a relatively quick run through of the housing and spatial strategy issues. So it's all set out in a bit more detail in our consultation, which you can view on our consultation portal. There's the website. We've set up questions to help you tell us what you think about these issues. We want to hear your views. You don't have to answer questions on every issue. You don't have to answer every question on each issue. Just tell us about what interests you most. Consultation's open until 20th of January, so you've got plenty of time to consider the issues and formulate your answers. There on the screen is a QR code, which also takes you directly to the consultation. Thank you. I'll stop sharing so I can see the questions are.
From the questions we see. Yeah. So we kick off with the first one. So we've got a question about heritage and historic environment. So where do you see this theme fitting in the city plan review?
Our heritage policies are largely in City Plan Part 2, so they are recently adopted in the Grenfell examination process. They were adopted in 2022. So we consider they are up to date largely. We'll be reviewing them to check if anything needs to change, but we will be tending to roll those forward into the new plan. So we're very aware of the importance of the heritage in the city. Is what makes the city attractive and a nice place to live. And particularly when we're looking at densities and tall buildings and so on, we're very aware of the need to respect the city's heritage.
Question about delivering homes does not equate to housing people who live in Brighton Hove. Will these be newcomers to Brighton and people who own but not live in Brighton?
Well, it's impossible to prescribe where people who buys the house. It's available in the open market. Anyone can buy it, anyone can live there, anyone can then live there. We are aware of the fact that house prices are so high, and that makes it difficult for many people that are sort of growing up in Brighton Hove to buy those houses. That's why we are very focused on maximising the delivery of affordable houses, particularly affordable homes to rent. That's one of our key priorities of us as a team bringing forward the plan and of the administration. We're also looking to mention about second homes and whether we can bring forward a principal residency policy which would ensure that homes are bought by somebody who's actually going to live there, not bought as a second home and left empty for part of the. So one here is saying, how successful has the delivery of affordable housing been? In our current plan, we set an overall target of 30% of all housing that comes forward in the city being affordable. And our monitoring shows that we are basically bang on that. So it's been fairly successful. There are still sites which come forward where viability is a challenge. These are sometimes quite high profile, and we may not get affordable housing on a particular site. But when you look overall at the statistics for the number of homes that come forward and what percentage of those are affordable, it's pretty much bang on the overall 30% target for the city plan. What our current policy seeks is 40% affordable housing in sites of 15 or more net dwellings, 30% or commuted sum between 10 and 15 dwellings, and 20% between 5 and 10. The numbers have been boosted overall by the council's own house building programme, but we've had some very large 100% affordable developments come forward, like the one at Bluebell Heights, which I showed on one of the slides earlier.
accommodation. So how will the student accommodation projections take into account the recent large drop in international students from both universities?
The student accommodation projections, they've been taken from discussions with the universities. So they are always up to date as we could make them at the time. Obviously, circumstances are changing all the time. There may be a large drop, a continued large drop in international students. If that happens, if there are fewer students, obviously that helps release a bit more pressure on the housing market. We monitor that, and as we move forward, we monitor our policies and we look to whether they need reviewing and so on. That's something we would take into account moving forward. But our analysis is based on recent discussions with universities, and most up-to-date information that we have.
Question about the SHLA, so the Strategic Housing Land Availability Assessment, and how this will fit in with the review.
The SHLA sets out the sites which we are aware of that are available for housing at the moment. The figure which I gave in the consultation in the presentation earlier, which said that we're aware of 11,500 homes, which is enough to deliver 670 on average over the plan period. That is based on the contents of our current SHLA, Strategic Housing Land Availability Assessment, published on the website. There's enough sites in there to provide 11,500 homes. So as we become aware of more sites, we'll update the SHLA of those, and we'll consider which ones should be formally allocated in the plan.
And we have a question about, have you considered low-rise, low-quality purchases with a view to securing sites for high-rise development? So, question about the council.
Whether the council would. This is one of the issues we will be considering. We are considering at the moment. We're just at the key issue stage. We're at the option stage. We're considering how we can increase housing in the city. And one of the some of the options I set out in the presentation were for increasing densities on sites and supporting suburban densification on appropriate sites. So those options would be covered by what you say in the question there. So it wouldn't necessarily be high-rise development, but certainly supportive policies for increasing densities on sites is one option that we could consider for seeking to increase the housing supply. And obviously we are very keen to hear people's views on that, as it can be quite a contentious topic.
Next question. SIL, so community structure levy, and can SIL distribution be strengthened?
I'm quite sure I understand what strengthened means. Obviously, SIL, and we'll continue to seek SIL, and we'll be reviewing our SIL charging schedule at some point as well to ensure that it's up to date and fit for purpose. Question, can we consider a greater provision of family homes? That is one of the questions which we've set out in the consultation. We'd be keen to hear views. Should we prioritise or require a certain percentage of family homes on suitable sites? We're aware that we don't have many sites that are suitable for sort of lower density housing. Those in the city centre, in the built up areas of brownfield, are more suited to flatter developments generally. So we are considering where we have sites that are suitable for perhaps lower density housing, should we be requiring a certain percentage of larger family homes to meet the needs.
In the chat, actually. Yeah, about how we could Many homes can be created along Eastern Road and Edward Street, having a tree-lined boulevard there.
Yeah, I can read
Could
it.
do the same along Lewis Road.
Yeah, Eastern Road, Edward Street and Lewis Road are currently development areas in our current city plans where we do support increased densities and significant development, so that there is potential for more housing there. Whether particular sites come forward depends on land ownership issues and with the intention of the landowner to develop them, but certainly that kind of gentle densification of 6 to 7 stories is something that we will be considering, and there's an option for increasing the housing supply. So we've been happy to receive comments on that.
Yeah, just that technical one about difficulty joining the web, joining information. So apologies if you found it difficult to find information. We have got everything posted about all the webinars on the Council's Your Voice platform, and that's been publicised through emails out to people on our mailing list and through posters in community centres and GPs. But yeah, apologies if you couldn't find that information easily.
Okay, so probably in a position to wrap it up now. So thank you very much for attending the webinar. Please do respond to the consultation